Thank you, Jillian. All right, awesome. Let's get into this. Thanks everybody for joining us today. As Jillian mentioned, my name is Scott Mann. I'm director for North American Channel, and today we're going to talk about evolving the data center sale. And what I mean when I say that is, I'm sure everybody's seen through the pandemic that there's been a big shift in IT buying patterns and really where they're buying from. And we've had a lot of great conversations and analyst conversations and everything of the likes. And we're seeing while this is really impacting the data center in across the industry, we're seeing a tremendous lack of impact, I guess, on our side of it. And a lot of that is because of our shift in our marketing message and really evolving that conversation to be the data center is a lot more inclusive than just the four walls of the data center that many people interpret it as. So it's evolving that data center conversation beyond those walls and where else the data center and the infrastructure impacts. And it's changing your messaging to adapt to what IT buyers are looking for in today's world versus what they were looking for 6 months ago. So we'll dive into that a little bit, and then we'll get into our solution and how that fits into the big picture of all of this. So first, just take a step back and this. I love this quote kind of to summarize everything that's happening in today's world. When it comes to IT spending, this is a Gartner quote from a recent report that they published. But CIOs have moved into emergency cost optimization, which means that investments will be minimized and prioritized on operations that keep the business running. So when you're thinking about positioning any product, when you're thinking about having a conversation with anybody on the IT side, where they're getting the budgets and where they're able to spend those dollars on, you have to think about how your solution that you're presenting to them fits into the needs of that company today. How it keeps the business running is the question you need to ask yourself, and it's how you need to position it to them, whether you're talking to the CFO, the CIO, or a sysadmin. That's the main message that needs to get its way up the chain in order for them to have the funds open. And we all know when it comes to keeping the business running, something like refreshing a data center is probably something that can be pushed off a year. But how does that data center conversation still remain relevant is what we're going to talk about today. And of course, when all something like drastic like this happens in the economy, there's verticals that are positively affected or unaffected, and then there's verticals that are negatively affected. So we've obviously seen a pretty dramatic shift in which verticals or which industries are buying, are creating opportunities with. So I wanted to shed some light on that. And I think if you look across the industry and you look at any analyst reports, it's going to be very consistent with what they're saying. And we're still seeing very high demand in number one in public sector, especially around the CARES Act in the US. There's still a lot of spend happening. It's just tweaking that messaging and positioning it to make sure that they can get that funding in regards to the distance learning and the capabilities that the solution can provide holistically. Not just saying that it's a data center sale. That's K to 12. That's counties. That's community colleges, everything of the likes within the public sector. Then there's manufacturing. Depending on which side of the manufacturing, you can break manufacturing really down into a lot of different segments. There's still a lot of activity in that, depending on how they're affected. And then engineering, and lastly, we have on there's legal and financial services, because through all of this, those are services that are still very much needed for all organizations. So they're still very much thriving. And they're probably at their peak from what they would have expected to be at this year, if anything. And when we think to what happened within the industry and how everybody's changing, we've had a lot of conversations with our customers. We have had conversations with other partners, and we've been having a lot of different analyst conversations to figure out, what is the next, where is all of this moving towards? And we've kind of put this into three different buckets of how we would define the phases of what organizations are currently going through. And if you look at it, phase one right there, organizational reactivity, that was the initial reaction of what happened when the pandemic hit. And we all know there's a huge mass purchase of end user laptops. There was an immediate need for employees to be able to access their data at the office without being at the office. And that created other issues or other potential vulnerabilities by extending out their company networks to less secure locations, which is essentially the end users' homes in most situations. And now we're kind of in phase two. Phase two is that business resiliency phase, and companies are now looking. We went through that big surge of work from home, and everybody had a work from home message of the likes coming out. And now what's happening is companies are looking to harden that work from home strategy. So while they might have done something reactive and they put a solution in place that got their employees up and running, it might not have been that ideal solution. So they're looking to figure out how we can create a new VDI type of implementation, a true VDI implementation, and create all the policies and everything associated around that in the correct manner for all of those different profiles of employees that they have and the different needs that they're going to have across their different employees. And then now that our data is now even more so on the move, we have to look at all the data security against new threats because we've extended our network to these less secure locations. So now there's this increased chance of having an attack that isn't coming actually in from your four walls of your data center. It's coming in from the four walls of that person's home and on a network that is going to be much less secure than the corporate network that you have back at head office. And then ultimately, looking to create that complete testable disaster recovery plan that everybody always talked about and had portions of that probably prior to this, but I don't think many organizations were fully ready for this. And now we're talking about business resiliency plans and developing those plans, which I'll talk to in more detail because I think that's becoming one of those ambiguous terms that everybody's using. But really, what does a business resiliency plan look like, and what components are important in that when in relation to the data center? And then you look at phase three, and phase three is kind of that business 2.0 era that we're on the cusp of. And now everything that's happened, companies are looking to bring in all of these new solutions that they weren't maybe even considering before, something like VDI. And they're asking a lot more from their IT infrastructure and their IT operations as a whole. So they need a solution that's integrated. They need a solution that has all of these different components that they can slowly build on building blocks one step at a time so that they can streamline those IT operations. But more importantly, in today's world, they need a solution that's more cost effective because they're bringing in so many more different components into the infrastructure, like VDI, different data security measures to protect that data at that home office as well, that they need to do a lot more with less. And because of all these different layers all these areas that their data is going to reside, they need a solution that incorporates protection for all those different areas where their data is going to reside, whether it be at the home office, whether it be in the cloud, whether it be in the data center, whether it be on a server, whether it be on a client device. So just kind of walking through the phases and really how this impacts into a solution that they need. What we saw was back in that phase one, what companies did, and it was the reactive approach, not necessarily the wrong thing to do because they needed to keep operations going, but it wasn't the ideal scenario that they could have done if they had an extended period of time to get this a proper solution out there. We saw a huge surge in purchasing IT laptops and tablets to get their end users outfitted, and then we saw even a shortage of devices that were left out in the industry that companies wanted more, and they didn't have the amount of devices out there to be able to provide them. So then the other strategy was BYOD. Most employees are going to have their own device at home. So let's set up VPN and let's have them connect with whatever device that they have at home. And while that makes a lot of sense, and it's not easy to get set up because you're going to have a lot of different devices. You're going to have your Windows devices. You're going to have your Chromebooks. You're going to have your Mac devices, and you're going to have to get VPN set up on all of those different devices, which puts a huge burden on IT. But the more long-term concern is that you've now extended your network out to the home offices. So in the ideal world, what we would have done was that we would have created, the VDI with remote access so that companies can create all the policies that they need to create and protect their data. But how quickly can that be implemented? And the answer is that it's not going to happen overnight like they need it to happen. So that's why we're in that phase 2 right now. And what we saw back in the start of all of this, and why VDI hardening, that work from home strategy, is becoming so important, and we're seeing a huge surge in that from any demand from our customers, as because the jump increase in ransomware attacks. Anytime there's a vulnerability, there's going to be an increase in hackers trying to get in through that new vulnerability that was created. And that's exactly what we saw. There's around 150% of an increase in attacks in March from the previous month. And there's a nice quote on here that says it's just easier, frankly, to hack a remote user than it is someone sitting inside their corporate environment. So that's the reality of the world that we're really in right now. And a lot of companies are figuring out how do we address these needs of our users without exposing us to any new security risks. So that's where we talk about the business resiliency plan. VDI is a component of that business resiliency plan. And when customers are looking for that integrated solution to streamline their IT operations, these are some of the four key components that they're looking for. The first one, built-in backup and DR. That's pretty much a standard across the industry. Everybody needs to make sure that they have that replication, the failover, failback, restore capabilities. In case anything happens, a natural disaster or something could still occur. But now we're talking work from anywhere. And we have employees that need to be on the move, and our data could be anywhere on any different types of devices. So users need to be able to quickly connect into whatever they had back at the office without actually being in the office. So because of that, now the data that's on their laptop or tablet, whatever device they're using, now you have that additional threat that you need to address. And that data could be on their laptop, it could be up in the cloud, or it could be in their data center. And you need to have not only protected against attackers, but now you have additional layers of data that needs to be backed up, just like we're talking about that built-in backup and disaster recovery. Now we have that data elsewhere that needs to still be backed up, and we need to make sure that all this intellectual property, any sensitive data that could be exposed outside of our network, that we have backups of that so we don't lose that information. So now that backup and DR strategy it broadened. It took on another level that we weren't expecting. So where this comes in, bringing this all back into the picture of where HC3 comes into the play of this, is that HC3, it's a hyperconverged platform. So hyperconverged is server, storage, virtualization built into one single, easy to manage user interface. But it's a platform, so it's a building block for more than just a refresh of a data center. And part of the advantage of a solution like ours is that it is just that. It's a building block. So you have whichever foundational layer that they start with, whatever their needs are currently today. The nice part is that our solution can be evolved over time as they continue to open up operations and they continue to build out that business resiliency plan. We have a solution that's part of this platform that they can easily implement, that is integrated with the platform, meaning that it is integrated at the software level, so that it's an easy solution to set up. It's an easy solution to manage on the day-to-day. And that's what's really important for any of these IT operations in today's world. So where HC3 fits in today's world is that core data center, of course. But where we have a unique advantage against any of the competition is that we can address those remote data centers very well. And part of the versatility of the platform, I'll go through in a couple slides, and just where that can stretch out to, how far we can address, or how small, I should say, we can address, and all the way up to how large and different type of workloads that we can address, all under one single management console, is an important factor for us. And then you have those VDI workloads. I would say right now VDI is definitely the hottest topic. For us, we have the core foundation of HC3 was built around simplicity and efficiency. And when we bring in a VDI solution into the platform, it's going to have those exact same core values of the solution. So when we talk about virtual desktops, and you compare that to the traditional virtual desktops of VMware or a Citrix, we're talking about a solution that's going to be 50 to 70% of the cost of that type of a solution. So very, very cost effective, but still maintains that simplicity, that ease of use, while still providing them with all of those features. And then the business resiliency component of that, being able to protect that data, whether it's on the core, whether it's in the remote data center, whether it's part of their hybrid cloud architecture, whether it's a VDI and it's living on a laptop that could be halfway across the world. We have that business resiliency solution built into that as well, so we can make sure that all that data is protected from any sort of like ransomware attacks, as well as any sort of backup or disaster recovery type needs. And just to jump back into really what HC3 is and the core of what the platform is, it's a consolidation of multiple vendors. So if you think of, is there any been hyperconverged technology? Has there ever been a better time than in today's world to talk about hyperconverged technology to a customer when what they're facing is the need to consolidate vendors? They're facing the need to streamline IT operations, and that's exactly what hyperconverged technology was built for. It integrates the use of the compute. It integrates the use of storage, hypervisor, backup, disaster recovery, and you have that VDI all into one single platform. They have one number to call if anything goes wrong, or you have one number to call if anything goes wrong, which also streamlines your operations if you're managing that for the customer, and it's still equally as important. And when I talked about the versatility of the platform, what I meant by that was we can go very large, and we can play in that large space where we have customers that are on the size of a petabyte and a half of storage. But where we can go that are a lot of the other competitors out there can't go is very small. We can go down as small as you see the platform on the far left there, the HD150. That HD150 platform, while you don't think of it as a data center, there's a lot of remote needs out there for customers where they're just running a single server. And that's not considered part of their data center. That's a single server out on its own that's probably got some software backing it up and such. But we can bring that under the single platform of HC3. We can have that under one single console to manage all of those, whether it's a construction site and they might have their head office, which is running a larger system. And then you've got hundreds, thousands of sites that are construction sites that might only have 5, 10, maybe 50 employees, anywhere in between there. They're really just running a single server. But with everything that they're putting on that server, that's intellectual property. That's really important information. Well, we can offer something like an HE150 to those types of customers. And then when you have maybe a regional office, something that's maybe 100 employees plus, and they have their own applications, their own mission critical applications that they're running on their own. Something like the HE1000 is a perfect fit in that scenario. And then you've got your HC3000 solution, which we'll dive into a little bit more detail, but that's the perfect platform when we're talking VDI, when we're talking high performance workloads. That's an NVMe based platform, so it's screaming fast. It's the workhorse of the HCI world. And then you've got the HD500. Those systems get large. They get really large. They've got the performance in there, and those are more your core data center type of a solution. And then bundling it all together, when you're talking about data centers, you have to always be talking about the hybrid data centers, hybrid cloud solution. Their data is never going to live in one place at one point in time, so you need to have that backed up, which is where we have that solution built in with Acronis. We have that solution in using our HS3 Cloud Unity platform, whether they need to have certain things like archival back into the cloud. We need to have all of that addressed, whether it's living in the Scale HC3 platform, whether it's living in HC3 Cloud Unity, it could be living in AWS, it could be living in Azure. That needs to all be part of their solution. And that's some area we can address that all into one solution. For those that follow that really manage the systems for the customers, we've also built out an MSP model. So what we've done is it's the exact same solution that's there, but the difference is that we've broken out the hardware and the software costs. And actually, this one I think might even start less than this now. It's one of the smaller systems that we have. But what we've done is basically you take that hardware, instead of it being a resale model where you get X% off of MSRP, we've built that into a monthly cost associated with it. So you see it starting at the HE100 system. That's going to start at $38 a month. That can scale all the way up to the HC5000 system, which starts around $500 a month. Depending on which system you need, it's going to be much more cost effective than having to purchase that system outright. And it also moves away the CapEx purchase and puts it more to the monthly purchase, just like the way you're charging your customers in that type of a scenario. So whether this is a customer that's running the infrastructure on their own, or it's a customer that you're deploying the infrastructure and managing it for them, we have a solution that fits those types of business models. So what I want to do from here is I want to dive into some of the different series, just some of the ones that I think are really important in today's world to address, and some of the key differentiators when you're talking to customers. And that's starting out with our HE series. So the HE150 that I talked about, doing a little deeper dive on that solution itself starts at $2,000 per node. So that's $2,000 MSRP. That would be the customer cost. And that would be for an 8 gig, 250 gigs, 250 terabyte of NVMe storage in each one of those nodes. And it's the perfect fit for those 1 to 10 workload type solutions. This is the smallest endpoint the smallest endpoint solution that you have for any hyperconverged platform out there. And what it does is really we bringing this down to scenarios where hyperconverged would never really be considered, where you're running a single server. Instead of running that single server, you can run a 3-node fully redundant system at the same price point as what that single server is going to cost you. And from your perspective, instead of selling commodity hardware into that scenario, you're now selling that 3-node system, which has a high profit profile built into it. So it's a highly profitable solution that you're selling in replacement of that commodity server at a very profitable price, but a very attractive price to the customer. So it's a really win-win in that situation. And it has all those same great enterprise business resiliency features that we're talking about, like the built-in backup and replication, things that single server can only do if you're adding on additional software and everything into that, which isn't necessarily as integrated as our built-in backup and replication would be for that. And whether it's a customer managing this for hundreds of thousands of sites, or whether it's you managing it for a couple, tens, hundreds of customers yourself, it has the central management capability. So what we will have basically a single platform where they can check in on what the status is of all of those different solutions are doing, and get more granular and dive into that one specific infrastructure that could be halfway across the world. So that's something that can be managed from anywhere at any time centrally. And then one of the key differentiations of this is that there's no other HCI solution that can offer this. Because of the way that our platform was built, we built it around being the most efficient architecture. And that's exactly why we can fit it down into solutions of this size, where we can run our software itself. It can run on 1 gig to 4 gigs of RAM and use a fraction of a core in a 3-node system like you see there. It uses a fraction of a core in one of the larger systems that you see as well. And in comparison to other hyperconverged vendors out there, they're going to start around 32 gigs of RAM, some maybe a little less than 32 gigs of RAM, 24 gigs of RAM just to power on the system. And this solution right here isn't even 8 gigs. This one is an 8 gig per node. So it's something that you couldn't even install their software on. That makes a key differentiation for us. And it was kind of ironic that we came out with this solution almost a decade ago. And now that everything that's happened in the world, this new focus on IoT and digital transformation, and this platform that we've designed is the perfect fit for there. So everything's really coming around full circle for us. Now, the next solution I want to dive into is our HD500 series, because this one kind of builds out the business resiliency conversation with them. When we're talking typical hyperconverged solution for the data center, you probably wouldn't want to put a hyperconverged solution for the backup or the archival component of that. And that's something that the HD500 series brings, because it's a very robust system. It can go from a terabytes to, I think, up to 64 terabytes. So it's great as that kind of a peripheral type of hyperconverged workload that you're running that still brings that whole management capability into one single platform. And that's in conjunction with our partnership with Acronis. So while it doesn't have to be Acronis is built in under the hood. So there is you get the advantage of having that single vendor support, where you're going to call into us and we'll support that Acronis solution. And that alone is attractive enough to a lot of customers. Of course, we have that direct line to Acronis on the back end, but when you have a problem, when something's going wrong, you don't want to have to figure out who to call, especially because you don't always know exactly where that problem lies. So having that single vendor to be able to call, it's a time saver for the customers, it's a time saver for you, and we have all those expedited lines that we can get to on the back end if it's needed. So we can expedite that whole process for you. So, and then Acronis is doing a lot of great things around not just being that backup functionality. It's also using its AI engine that's already built into it, do more proactive cyber protection type functionality. So you're not only bringing a backup and disaster recovery solution or an archival type solution, you're bringing a ransomware type solution to the data center, and you can expand that beyond the data center and talk to the client devices and manage that all under that Acronis platform. And what that looks like, just to give you some perspective on it, this is kind of not any, it doesn't have to be in every scenario, but this is a common type of deployment that you can have with your customer. And all of our different families of products, the HE100 to the 5000, all of them can be replaced in this. So it really depends on the customer's needs. But just to kind of show you the architecture of what it all looks like, you'd have first on the site one there, that's going to be the core data center. That's going to be their office, their main office where everything is running. And then you might want to have some sort of local backup, and that could be running an existing NAS that they have, or it could be the HE500 system. And that HE500 system using for just basically for archival type purposes, but also being able to spin up some mission critical workloads as needed if they need something immediate on the fly within that data center. And then there's always going to be that remote, that hybrid cloud strategy. So there's going to be data moving to the cloud. What does that strategy look like? And the Acronis solution can use that we can use that for archival purposes. We can use that for DR purposes. And then having that secondary site. So that secondary site with the built-in backup and disaster recovery that HE3 already has, they can now, whether it's a single node or maybe it's a secondary site that they have workloads already running in, maybe it's a secondary site where they have a single server and they're just using it as running a couple different workloads. We can now turn that secondary site into a disaster recovery site for them and have everything replicating over there, that if there was a disaster and it needed to be spun up off-site, it could be spun up at that secondary site that they have. So while not all of this is necessarily needed across the board, in larger, more upper mid-market type enterprise type customers, they want this type of comprehension in their backup strategy. Then you get to the lower end, they might only want different components of this. That's fine. The whole platform concept is that whatever they need within that platform, we have the solution that's built for them. Let's figure out what their needs are and let's get them the right solution based on their needs and their requirements. The last solution I want to talk about, the last system in here, is our HD3000 system. So I like to call this one the HDI powerhouse, and that's a Scott Mann trademark. That's not a scale computing trademark by any means. So the HDI powerhouse, what I mean by that is the HD3000 system. It's an all NVMe system. So it can go up to just shy of 77 terabytes of all NVMe SSD storage, which means that it's screaming fast. So the system itself, in comparison to any of the other ones, you've got faster storage because of those NVMe SSDs. You've got faster networking capabilities because it goes up 25 gig. Let's not have the networking become the bottleneck if there's a need for that. And it's got larger processing capabilities, so it can scale up to 52 cores per node. So it's a massive increase in performance for any workloads like a VDI workload or database types workloads that are highly intensive, where this is needed. It's also the future of storage. You're seeing NVMe as the protocol is becoming a lot more commonly used and is becoming a lot more commonly needed. So it's very hot in the industry right now. And just talking about an NVMe type of solution in comparison to a SATA SSD, it becomes an immediate advantage across any of the competition if it's not being positioned, especially at such an attractive price point that this solution comes in comparison to anything else out there in the industry. And for those that aren't as familiar with SATA versus NVMe, just to put it into perspective, a SATA SSD can manage around 100 megs per second. NVMe drives, on the other hand, they provide speeds of 3,500. So that's a 7x increase in the performance. And I was told an analogy once that it really helped make everything click for me. And if you consider the SSD drive itself isn't changing. It's the bus type. So the bottleneck is how that capacity within that SSD is being utilized. So if you kind of consider it, you have X amount of people that are getting onto a plane. That plane is like a SATA SSD. There's only one entrance and one exit. So the bottleneck is that entrance and exit on that plane. An NVMe SSD, it's like a train. A train has multiple exits. So while the capacity is still the same for that SSD, it's being able to utilize more of that capacity because of the additional entrances and exits that train has. So that's the reason of the increase in performance. It's really just a change in the protocol. It's not actually a change in the SSD itself. So some of the deployment scenarios, I've already touched on many of these performance intensive use cases though, but it's not always performance intensive. This is the future of storage. Customers want the next best thing. When they're putting anything in today, we're talking about that phase 3 approach. They're looking at the future. They're looking at how is this going to look in 3, 4, 5 years, and they want to put in the latest and greatest technology. This is what the NVMe platform is. So while it's great for databases, it's great for VDI. There's all other software is going to catch up to the requirements and be able to utilize this type of storage. So you're going to see a big shift in this over the next coming years. Now that it's kind of hit that cost parity where NVMe isn't outrageously priced in comparison to a SATA SSD. And ultimately, like in the VDI picture, I touched on this at the beginning as well. This becomes VDI that you can afford. It's never been the year of VDI, and unfortunately, it took something like a pandemic to kind of push it there. But what we're able to do with our HD3 VDI is we can bring the solution to the rest of the world that wasn't able to afford a VDI solution, or they didn't have the capabilities to deploy a very complex VDI solution. With this as the foundation of that, we can deploy with the HE150 system, you can get something to as small as a 25 user shop. And then with this HE3000 system, we're talking up to thousands of users for a VDI deployment at a price point that is drastically less than the competition. And from a simplicity aspect, it's a simple platform to set up. It'll deploy in a fraction of the time of a traditional platform where it'll take months to deploy. Some companies will talk about how well they did by deploying it within weeks. A solution like this can be deployed in a day if it's needed, depending on the size of the workload. It's very, very streamlined, and it's integrated at the core of our solution. So all of that automation is built in to make deployment even easier. And to wrap things up on all of this, I think this is a great quote to kind of put the tie in on the present, the bow on the present. But recovery requires a change in mindset for most organizations. So there's no bouncing back when we get out of all of this. Whenever the pandemic is gone, there's a need to reset and move forward, and that's what repositioning how you're talking about the data center conversation. Data center shouldn't be the start of your conversation. It should be the need that customer has, that need for the business operations, and how do we keep that business up and running? How do we keep that data protected? That should guide the conversation, and the data center comes with that. When you talk in VDI, we're talking about getting their data to their end users that are working at home, making sure that we have policies built around it so that their data is all protected. That needs to live on somewhere, and that's going to be on the data center. So make sure to, if you're having these conversations with customers, try to evolve that type of messaging and practice it on a couple customers. If there's anything that works for you guys, I'd love to hear more about it. Anything that you find that is particularly interesting when you're positioning your customers, any feedback that you're getting from any of this, we'd love to hear it all. This is how we put together presentations like this, and we come to these types of conclusions on where the industry's at right now, is because we hear from our partners and our customers, and we take that information and we consolidate it all. We're trying to share as much of that information with you as we can. And for my last slide here, partner with us. If you are not an existing partner with Scale, it's a very simple process to get signed up. It's a single agreement to click accept on. If you have any questions, you can go to our website, partners.scalecomputing.com, and you can click to apply, or feel free to reach out to me, sman@scalecomputing.com, or you can send any general inquiries to our channel alias, channel@scalecomputing.com. And with that, we will look at some questions here. All right, so first question, what hypervisor does HD3 use? And that's a great question and a very common question we come across. There's a reason I didn't really touch on it, and that's because the hypervisor itself has become commoditized in today's world. 10 years ago, different story. Well, that was still in the evolution of the virtualization world. Nowadays, features and hypervisors itself are commoditized. They can do what the customers need them to do. Under the hood, we don't use VMware, we don't use Hyper-V, we're using KVM. And there's a strategic reason that we did that. Number one, it's because we're not using a third-party software. And when we have a third-party software integrated in there, if we need to get anything changed, if we want to advance our solution, we're very reliant on those third-party providers. And number two, and the big cost, is that there's a tax associated with something like a VMware solution. And we're trying to bring a solution that's more cost effective to the market. And by incorporating a solution that has a V tax, or a virtualization tax, a cost just to integrate a solution like this together, seem kind of intuitive with it. So we built KVM under the hood of it. So we were in control of the platform. We can develop around that. And there's no additional costs associated with that licensing. And we got one more question. Do you have a GPU model for VDI workloads? And that is, that's a really good question. That is a common question that we get, especially in the last 4 months. Everybody looking at expanding their VDI deployments to there are types of end users that are very processing oriented. And we do have a GPU model. I didn't talk to it there. We're more in the pre-sale of it right now. But we have a GPU model. If you have any questions about it, I would say reach out to channel@scalecomputing.com, and we can get you in touch with product management, who can show you the exact models and everything that we have coming out, which GPU it is that we're using, and how we can configure a solution like that for any customer or your own needs. And with that, I think we will wrap up unless there's any more questions. It doesn't look like it. No, so well, thanks everybody for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out with anything. And we look forward to working with you further as the rest of the year progresses. And we hope that we can build a better partnership together.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Have a great afternoon.